I have something cool to show you.
Hello world, welcome to Hex 1E. My name is Ralph. I now have the opportunity to compare three different cooling solutions from the same GPU and thought of sharing it with you.
But before that, and as a favor, if and if you like what we do here, subscribe to the channel. Comment on what you liked and didn't like about the video. Any ideas or suggestions you may have are of course welcome too. Finally, please spread the word about the channel and let's get on with it.
On the one hand, we have the stock cooler, which is a ROG Strix cooler for the RX 6700 XT. Then we have a nice block GTX from AlphaCool, and finally a water block from the brand Bikeski. Anyway, let's see which one of these three performs better, or even if one performs better than the other.
Let's take a look at the stock cooler first, and it's a big one. Weighing a rather hefty 1196 grams, this 90mm fan solution doesn't even spin up until about 30% load. We let the card run for about 30 minutes for the heatsink to soak and the temperatures to stabilize. For testing, the fan speed was set at 100%. Now, let's get rid of that stock cooler and start testing our water blocks. To remove the stock cooler, you first take care of the spring retention bracket, move it out of the way, and then remove the PCIe bracket screws. Once done, the whole cooler assembly should just lift out. Be careful and don't forget about the fan and RGB cabling while doing it. Once this is done, we flip the card to remove the back plate. First, we unscrew everything from the center reinforcement. Flip the card, remove the reinforcement, and take care of the two final screws near the PCI bracket. And flip it over for a final time. Wiggle the backplate a little bit, it should just come off now. Now that we've freed the card from its shackles, we then clean the die. For this, I use cotton swabs with some IPA, but you can use dry wipes as well. In both cases, be careful not to leave fibers near or on the die, as this could damage the card during operation. As seen here, installation of the water block is pretty straightforward, and to no surprise, mimics the removal of the stock ASUS ROG Strix cooler, just in reverse. The only real difference is the lack of the PCB reinforcement. One thing to look out for are the thermal pads. These come in different thicknesses and often aren't cut to size. As stated, both water blocks come with everything you need for assembly, even a backplate, and the instructions are pretty simple. Sadly, Bikeski drops the ball a little bit here by providing a generic installation manual instead of a specific one for this water block. But the water block installation isn't really too hard, so I'll give them a pass. Just mind to install the spacers between the screws and the PCB where appropriate to avoid a short circuit. Let's go over this quickly. We begin by applying some thermal paste on the GPU die, using a spatula to get as even a spread as possible. Once you have the thermal paste applied, place a water block on top of the card, trying to match the screw holes on the water block with those on the PCB. Once you're ready, carefully flip the whole thing over. And while doing so, just mind the PCB not sliding atop the water block. Now that we have the card flipped over, if at all, hopefully just a slight adjustment to align the screw holes on water block and card. Having aligned the screw holes, marry water block and card using the provided screws. Keep in mind not putting any screws into those holes required to mount the backplate later on. With water block and backplate, do remember to put the prepared thermal pads wherever necessary. Their location will be indicated in the manual. Do not use the stock ones already on the card, as their thickness and placement may not match the requirements of your particular water block. Finally, screw on the backplate and you're done. Now that we've installed a water block, let's take a look at one. AlphaCool first. In regards to its design, AlphaCool didn't stray from their regular GPU stuff, and that's fine if you like it. The block weighs in at 1187 grams. Removing this water block is a pretty simple affair, so I won't go into any details. Just remove the backplate and thermal pads, unscrew the water block, remove the thermal pads on top of the card, clean the die, and you're done. It's now the turn for our second liquid cooling solution. Let's then take a look at the bike ski, bike ski water block. This block sports a less industrial and, in my opinion, more elegant design. This is the lightest water cooling solution of all three we're looking at. It weighs 861 grams. For both the water cooling blocks, we're using a single dedicated 240 by 40 mm radiator in tandem with two Noctua NF12As and a D5 pump running at full throttle. The rest of the setup shouldn't really matter. We're using an open air test bench for all three cooling solutions. And the room temperature is being kept constant at 24 plus minus 0.5 degrees C. To measure the thermals, we're using up to 3 dedicated sensors, plus those on the GPU itself. The sensors are one on the GPU, one near the test bench to measure room temperature, and when using a liquid cooling solution, one measuring the temperature of the liquid. Reported temperature data is total temperature. We are not using degrees over ambient here. Now that we know our three contestants and the testing conditions, let's finally see some numbers. And here we go. Beforehand, let's have a look at our idle temps, where, when looking at a 1440p resolution, our water blocks actually get outperformed by the stock cooler. Not by much though. We can see the same picture at 4K ultrawide, which is 3840 times 1440 pixels. Furmark is next on our list. By the way, you can find the settings I've used for all this testing down in the video description. With Furmark, instead of idle, the picture turns. We now have a more than 30 degrees difference between water blocks and stock cooler. And while there is a small difference between both water blocks, that difference is negligible compared to the latter. We can see the same picture at 4K ultra-wide, but the delta between stock cooler and water blocks has grown to around 40 degrees C, a big win in favor of the water blocks. Unigine Heaven is next on our list, where we can again observe about a 30 degrees C delta between the water blocks and the stock cooler. That margin, again, widens at 4K ultra-wide. But in both cases, the difference is not as large as it was in Furmark. Our last synthetic test is TimesPy, which we looped for several times. Then we took the best, worst, and median result of each loop, then averaged those values. Finally, averaged the averages of each of those loops. To no surprise, we see the water blocks outperforming the stock cooler by a wide margin. In fact, the widest margin we had until now. A delta negligibly larger than 50 degrees C. As with the previous tests, and comparing 1440p to 4K ultra-wide, the margin widens even further. I think that's enough for that type of testing. Let's take a look at some games. And our first contender is Cyberpunk 2077. No news here though. Again, we have a margin of about 30 degrees C. A little bit larger, but yeah. 4K ultra-wide delivers much of the same. Let's have a look at one final game. In this case, Microsoft's 2021 Flight Simulator, where we did suburbs, city, woodland, and ocean tests. And to no surprise, about the same results as before. And nothing really changes at 4K ultra-wide. Again, I think we found a pattern now. And since all tests produce about the same results, we can forego any further testing. It's getting boring. When we now take an average of everything but the idle temps, we get a delta of about 45 C between the water blocks and the stock cooler. It doesn't matter if you're looking at 1440p or ultra-wide 4K. The more important takeaway though is that at 1440p there's only a 1.6 degrees C difference between both water blocks. And when looking at 4K ultra-wide, the delta actually shrinks to 1.4 degrees. which does mean that if your choice lies between any of these two water blocks, you can choose either and have no regrets. But apart from the temp difference, there is another side to this story. That the lower the temps, the longer the GPU can keep up its boost clocks. I have tested all three solutions with the same software suite as before. Just follow along on my summary. With furmark, we have a massive 438 MHz or 17.8% difference between the water blocks and the stock cooler, and about a 70 MHz or 3% difference between the two water blocks. And while those values are specific to 1440p, the trend continues with 4K. Again, sorry for not going into each graph specifically, but we have the same pattern as with the temps, with the delta between the water blocks and the stock cooler being rather large, and the difference between both water blocks pretty minor. As you can see, it doesn't really matter if you're looking at synthetic tests or if you're looking at games. Cyberpunk 2077 and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 exhibiting the same behavior. Water blocks perform much better than the stock cooler, and the difference between the water blocks is negligible. Furmark is just the most extreme example of this behavior. The delta shrinks with other tests and real games. Let's now have a look at the summary. As you can see here with our 1440p averages, the clock delta between the stock cooler and the water blocks hovers around 190 MHz. And the same between both water blocks is around a third of that, with 61 MHz. The 4K ultrawide averages don't reveal anything that changes the narrative. The stock cooler gets outperformed by the water blocks, which both offer excellent performance. And as with in nearly all previous tests, the alpha cool block performs a little bit better.
Wow, that turned out quite different than I had expected. But I'm happy to be surprised and to find out that these water cooling things I do are not just for looks. They actually cool better? Who would have thought? I should have. I don't know. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, like. Wanna see more of us? Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. My name is Ralph. See you next time, here at X1E.
Okay, yeah. I don't have water blocks lying around and comp their performance because there's nothing better to do. It's of course for one of my builds. This is Midnight Raven. I hope you like it. The owner certainly does.